And a very good evening, everybody. Welcome to this week's Kaizen Central. How lovely to see you all. And delighted to say that our guest today is Martin Chilcott. I don't know of anybody who has quite such a grasp of what manufacturing is capable of doing and perhaps should be doing to grasp the possibilities of sustainability and the goal towards carbon net zero. Martin, a very warm welcome to you. I hope you're having a tolerable spring. The sun is now out, so I suspect we should all look on the bright side, as always, but great to see you.
Thank you, Nick. It's great to be here. Yeah, no, it's lovely and sunny, isn't it? It seems like the first break in the weather for 30-something days. Yeah,
I know.
Great.
Yeah, bizarre. We were just looking at some photographs, my wife and I, of the garden this time last year. And the corn was as high as an elephant's eyes, they might have put it in Oklahoma. But this year it's about, what little stuff we've got is about 1.5 inches tall. But anyway, great to see you. Martin, I know that COP26 is driving a lot of thinking around sustainability, and we're getting a lot of messaging from government and the like about it. I wonder if you can just sort of give us your perspective on whether a lot of what we're hearing is actually progress, or whether there's an awful lot of PR going on as well at the same time.
Well, I'm sure it's a bit of both, isn't it? There's going to be a lot of PR and greenwash, but there's lots of very serious stuff going on underneath it. I mean, we do genuinely have pretty much global consensus now. Now that there's been a change of administration in the States, there's a dialogue now opening up with China, and even if there is huge disagreements between China and the West on lots of matters, the one area where I think there's great opportunity for collaboration is around climate change and dealing with it. And then away from governments, at a corporate level, I think there has been the last 12 months, a massive transformation, 18 months, massive transformation. And it sounds like an awful thing to say, and I don't mean it as an awful thing, but COVID has perhaps been a blessing when it comes to the fight against climate change. It has made people realize in finance in particular, but just generally, but in finance in particular, that the sort of what were traditionally off-balance sheet risks that sit in nature and our treatment and our relationship with nature have the ability to bite us and tear trillions of share prices and of share capital around the world within months. And I think that was sort of intellectually understood in a lot of quarters, but nobody had really felt it. And I think one of the things that COVID has done is really bring it home to bear. And it has transformed the way in which financial markets, in the West in particular, but increasingly around the world, are beginning to look at risk, corporate risk, and the pressure now on, well, I mean, there was a big case win against Shell today in the Netherlands, where the pressure ramped up on Shell to accelerate its targets for emissions reductions are going to have to be taken very seriously. There's pressure at ExxonMobil at the moment, big pressure there taking place. There is a level of forensic analysis and consideration around climate risk in business that was not there 1 year ago. And it's coming out of the financial sector, and it's putting pressure on corporates to set targets, and then they have to achieve those targets. And so they're having to turn that into real practical activity. So we're beginning to see the oil tanker, maybe a very, very big arc that it's going to have to turn on, but we are beginning to see it turn on that arc.
I'm interested. I remember a conversation we had some time ago. You were talking about how, was it BlackRock is one of many companies that is actually insisting that it's the companies in which it invests and their customers have a climate change policy. Have I got that right? Is that an accurate reflection of what you were saying?
Yes, yeah. Well, BlackRock are in many ways leading the way amongst large funds. There are some more traditional funds and impact funds and kind of specialist funds that have been doing a lot for quite some time. But BlackRock are right up there and pushing hard and insisting on transparency of risk. And importantly, and this is a big change, not just that we measure and provide visibility and report on risk, but that we do something about it. And I think that's what we're really beginning to see, pressure on achieving stuff. So when large corporates are being encouraged by their activist shareholders to disclose those risks and to set targets for reduction, they are now beginning to be held to account of, well, do you have a serious plan to hit that target? What are you really doing about it? And so, BlackRock are absolutely one of the names out there. I think Mr. Fink writes to his stakeholders on a regular basis now about climate risk and how important it is to the management of their portfolio.
I'm guessing that there's obviously somebody who resists the concept of adapting to climate change will say there's cost. I know that your message and the message a lot of people are giving out is that actually there may be some investment, but the return on the investment way outweighs what it's going to cost to adapt business to climate change. But have people got enough money to invest? Is there strain happening in companies in perhaps being forced in some cases to do it?
Yes, well, so good questions. I mean, I think you could break down that into a series of different ways of looking at it. One is short-term versus long-term. So the long-term cost of inaction is far greater than the short-term cost of action. I mean, the figures aren't even close on a global level. On an individual company level and a corporate level, I think it's the difference between short-term, largely efficiency-driven, eco-efficiency-driven projects, which definitely provide a return. Returns on investments you can get by attracting talent who are drawn towards company with the right ethos and purpose, versus some specific longer-term capital projects. But what's interesting about some of these capital projects is that we're beginning to see the introduction of green bonds and new financing mechanisms that are reducing the cost of the capital, making those sorts of projects much more feasible than they were in the past. So we're beginning to see an interesting change there as well. But you know, the cost of inaction is just not even to be considered. I mean, it's just way off the scale. The other thing that is, of course, interesting at a government level is just how easy governments have found it to spend money over COVID. You know, we've proven, at least at the moment, you can make investments into things. You can do stuff to save the economy. Well, if this was another case of saving the economy, you know, it's a great candidate for proper investment.
That's an interesting point. To see a conservative government, is it the third conservative government in the last 11 years, actually, you know, literally spending money like it's going out of fashion, and the hint of austerity only just being just a hint at the moment, but goodness knows. So that's that. In many ways, then it's not just that COP26 is a good focal point. Actually, all the tides that are buffeting us at the moment are actually all running in the same direction, and the need to actually invest. I find that that's a really interesting insight. I'd like to obviously throw the floor open. This is not the Nick and Martin show. This is open to everybody to ask questions or make points or sense check their own intended policies against what Martin does. Actually, Martin, I'm sorry, can I just ask you to describe what Manufacture 2030 does, because I think that's important in the context of the conversation.
Sure. We're a for-profit, mission-driven company. We're a software as a service platform, and our mission is to accelerate carbon emissions reductions across manufacturing supply chains. We particularly work with global corporations like Toyota and Honda, Reckitt Benckiser, Bayer, Roche, companies as the Co-op, who have very large manufacturing supply chains, which represents the majority of their emissions footprint. So the majority of their risk and their cost around carbon is going to be in their supply base. And we help them engage with their suppliers, firstly to measure the nature of that risk, then to develop an action plan to reduce that risk, reduce that carbon, and then supporting the suppliers in building capacity, whether that's know-how, access to technology, access to finance, that'll help them accelerate the implementation of their plans. And so we do it at a site level. So it's a really very specific, you're able to capture the data that tells you what the footprint is and what we call the glide path, which is a really important bit. What is your trajectory, and is it tracking towards the target of your customer? Are you reducing fast enough to hit that target? And we then build support around that trajectory. If there's a gap, and there nearly always is a gap, how do we close that gap? What are the very specific things that could be done to help that supplier meet that target?
Well, for the first time ever, we actually got a question from somebody watching on YouTube. It's exciting. This is the first result.
Is that your fan base or my fan base, Nick?
I think it's actually our accumulator fan base. It's Luke Appleby from Equilibrium Risk. He would be joining us, but his son's got tennis every Thursday, so that's what that's all about. Luke says, looking beyond just climate change, how can we get business to commit to other sustainability goals, particularly the heavy industries? Now, given that there's a time lag, I can't actually ask him in real time if he could expound on that. But does that ring a bell? He says, looking beyond just climate change, how can we get business to commit to other sustainability goals, particularly heavy industries?
Do you want me to have a crack at that, or are we opening that to the floor as a whole? I'll have a crack. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. Well, I think what we're seeing is businesses increasingly educated about how they think about and manage risk, and that, of course, the traditionally off-balance sheet risks that are covered by this portmanteau word sustainability includes not just climate risk, but includes, reputational risks, modern slavery, other social risks, water, increasingly important, different types of waste, reach and chemicals issues. So I think what we're increasingly seeing is businesses understanding broadly that these risks need to be managed. And what's really interesting is that companies that manage these risks well outperform their peers who manage them less well. So there is a clear correlation between outperformance of an index in a public index for companies and those trackers which track against strong ESG performance. So I think this is all part of a broader education in business about what being a great business is and what good performance is, what quality is. And I think the more that education goes on, the easier it will be to persuade boards to do the right thing, because it's the right thing for the business to do. It's good for the shareholder as well as for the triple bottom line, as it's sometimes called.
Yes, it does feel like the ship turned quite abruptly in the 70s. Everybody points to Milton Friedman's article saying that shareholders are effectively being cheated by the way businesses were being run. And they went towards being much more shareholder oriented thereafter. It feels slightly as though that ship is turning again. Simon, you've raised your digital hand. If that's not
do you think that company performance, which way do you think the causality runs?
Oh,
Do you think it's companies who are just generally very, very well run are ahead of the game in this area as well? Therefore, they score well on those points and they're overperforming, or is it the other way around?
It's a really great question, Simon. Really great question. And there is a clear correlation. I'm not sure there is always a clear causality about which is the cause, and but if you break it down into specific areas, you can see some areas that suggest that businesses that have a strong purpose end up being better managed very often. Not always, but very often. And you can see the way it attracts talent, the kinds of people who want to join in. You can see the way it motivates teams to perform at a higher level. You can also see in very specific areas. So I'm going to take a really good example. 2 points of comparison. In the UK, so Cambridge University, a wonderful chap called Professor Steve Evans and his team there have done a series of studies looking at what you might call the eco-efficiency or the non-labor resource efficiency of manufacturing in the UK. And the average UK manufacturer improves their non-labor efficiency by about 1% per annum. Okay, that's energy, that's materials, that's water, about 1% per annum. When you take into account inflation and you take into account that's the average, you realize there's an awful lot of companies that must be getting more expensive to run. They then looked at best in class, and the best in class came very often out of the automotive industry, Nissan and Toyota and stuff. And they're operating at sort of 7% per annum. And when you look at that, that means over a 10-year period, they're halving the amount of natural resources, of materials and energy going into their product. I mean, that's bound to give you an advantage, isn't it? So when you break it down, you can see there are definitely correlations which suggest operating more sustainably will make you a better business, but you can also see that better run businesses are likely, for good reasons, to include these things. So it's a little bit of a reinforcing loop, I think, that's positive. Nick, you're on mute.
Yeah, Bram, you've got your hand up.
Yep, that is correct. So we talk about sustainability, and like what was asked early on in the question by Luke, I think, sustainability is not just about climate action or clean energy or recycling and waste management. And that's what the common misconception is, right? The problem with recycling and waste management is we're talking about the end of the product life cycle. There's not much benefit to be gained. We talk about clean energy, we're only talking about how the energy is generated. We're not talking about energy efficiency, right? Now, if we talk about sustainability as a holistic thing, it is the overarching thing which requires all 7 billion of us to participate together to improve the status of the planet. It won't happen if we just say ESG, 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 which is just an extension of CSR. That's not how it's going to work. It has to get the buy-in from all 7 billion of us. And the way to do it is ask the question, how do we make the right thing to do the easiest thing to do? As simple as that. Sustainably designed items shouldn't be the most expensive ones on the shelf because, they are sustainable. They must be the cheapest items on the shelf, which encourage people to go out there and pick up and buy these sustainably designed items. The other thing I think we spoke about was better not to do anything than to do something that practices sustainability, because sometimes not doing things automatically gives you a sustainability gain. And the other thing is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, 17 of them. And I have a beautiful chart on my computer that splits them into their impact on economy, society, and biosphere, with the collaboration, number 17, running across all 3 levels. We need to start looking at these not as a grid, like you see 1 to 17, but at the levels at which they generate the impact and collaboration there running right through the heart of it. So that's how I see sustainability. That's how Equitas sees sustainability. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, Martin, we've had conversations before on the group about, there's the iconic £1 T-shirt from Primark, if you like. For as long as people think that they're getting a good deal, while the planet isn't, and nor are the people who actually were paid peanuts to make that T-shirt. That, I suspect, Ram, is what you're saying. There has to be, we have to get over the £1 Primark T-shirt state of mind.
Yeah, we have to get over the £1 Primark T-shirt state of mind, but we have to get into the mindset that if that £1 T-shirt has been designed, manufactured, and supplied sustainability, that has to be at £1 over anything else that has not.
Okay, so yes, I take the point. I was using the price as an indicator of really bad methodology, but it might be that it's the cheapest and the best. So yeah,
I have another chart. I have another chart which I've developed in my own time that will actually show you how you can actually reduce the cost of usage to the end customer by being more sustainable. I have a chart on my laptop as well, which I use all the time. So it is possible. It's basically all of us, forgive me for saying it, pulling the finger out and doing it, basically.
And Ram, I mean, I think you make a really good point about the holistic approach. I think it's a really good point. And it's not just that we need to devise and conceive of, let's say, circular economic models. We actually have to redefine some of the models of ownership. So when you look at, let's just take electric vehicles. Okay, I know there are all sorts of challenges in their manufacture, but they're just the same challenges in the manufacture of diesel and petrol cars as well. But let's take them. They're high priced at the moment. But when you look at the lifetime costs of them, you suddenly realize the running costs of electric vehicles versus diesel and petrol, it's a fraction. And for some of the barriers to break down, we're going to have to combine, I think, electric vehicles along with car clubs and shared ownership. So one of the really important, not only do we have to think of the circularity of materials that are necessary for us to make this transition, but we also have to start thinking differently about concepts of ownership and what you're buying. Are we buying the ability to travel, or are we buying a car? You know, when you start breaking down certain products and changing the nature of the ownership model, you can often get a much better service at a fraction of the cost, much more sustainably. I've seen some very interesting conversations that haven't got anywhere, but just to give you the sort of thinking that needs to take place. So one particular DIY store was thinking very hard about paints and paintbrushes. And what they realized was when their customers bought paintbrushes, on average, they used them once, they got clogged up with paint, and they sat in the corner in a half-used tin of paint somewhere. And so they were trying to play with the model of, you don't buy a paintbrush from us, you hire it. And we give you an envelope where you send it back to us and we clean it and we rehire it out again. Can we move away from what had become, it wasn't the intention, but it had become a single-use disposable paintbrush to something else? And I think there are multiple layers of current systems of production and consumption which need to change. And part of it's circularity, part of it is about change of ownership models, some of it is about new technologies, and underlying that is a change in energy sources. I mean, that's, you know, it has to be, it's not the only thing that has to happen, but it is absolutely fundamental. We have to change our energy sources.
Exactly, Martin. I think you just alluded to SDG 12, responsible production and consumption, just there. You know, so yeah, bang on. Yeah, thanks for that.
You raised an interesting point, Martin, with the change of ownership thing, because were that to happen, the dislocation in industry would be profound. If I own a car and I've only got one, I have a car that sits outside my door 365 days a year. If I only used a car on 50 days a year,
right,
then I you know, what's going to happen? I mean, we're storing up some profound change as well as
we are. So it's a really profound change. Yeah, absolutely. I think we can hardly imagine the change. Consider us as living in 1995, and we've all just heard about this thing called the interweb for the first time. If you'd asked us in 1995 to imagine how our world was going to be changed, you know, 15 years later or 20 years later, I think we would struggle. But the change has been profound. The same is going to happen and is beginning to happen right now. It is absolutely profound. I mean, what a waste to have your car used for 50 days of the year and sitting on your drive. I mean, it's extraordinary. When self-driving cars come along, you know, we had a little chat, didn't we, earlier at the beginning of this, a little joke about it. You'll just ask for a car and it'll come. It'll turn up at your door. You won't have a car.
And very large companies and an awful lot of people will go out of business. So that's some of the business.
I mean, look, there's a transition that has to take place. I mean, you could have said that about Encyclopedia Britannica and the rise of Wikipedia. I mean, transitions like this have winners and losers. Or you could even see it in British Aerospace and Engines. You know, the aircraft companies don't buy the engines, they lease them nowadays. The whole concept and the whole model has changed.
Stephen, sorry, I've kept you waiting, but Stephen Barr, good evening. Lovely to see you.
Hey, good to see you too. Sorry, I'd forgotten I put my hand up. Martin, it's very good to see you. Voice of sanity, as always. Just to extend a little bit on Ram's question earlier on, I think we all get it, don't we? That getting everybody involved in sustainability is absolutely vital. So in the design stage and in manufacturing and with customers. So we need to think about innovation as well as adoption. In my experience, a lot these days is around helping smallish manufacturers rather than the larger ones that you've mentioned so far. I just wonder, what do you think about Made Smarter's initiatives at the moment to support innovation and adoption with the two wings that they got? Do you think there's more that government and Made Smarter needs to do to help SMEs in particular?
I think SMEs do need support. I feel this, I know it's not meant, Stephen, to be a trick question, but I feel it's a kind of question which I trip myself up now and accidentally either under criticize government or over criticize government. I'm not sure I'm qualified to say whether they're doing enough. More can and needs to be done, I guess. End of story, both around adoption and around innovation. Whether government is always the right way to get that adoption and innovation into the system, I don't know. It's sometimes quite tricky. Government is necessarily rather clumsy at these things, very often, isn't it? But look, we've got so much more that we need to do, and SMEs in particular need support. I mean, when I spoke about the kind of large businesses we work with, those are the supply chain owners. So a lot of the companies who are actually on our platform using our system, learning about what they could do and implementing and tracking, a lot of those are SMEs. And they are smaller organizations who are being exposed to best practice and innovation and all the rest of it. And it's more powerful, I think, coming from their customers probably than coming from government. But having said that, I think, you know, we need all the help we can. It's a big curve that we're turning this tanker on, and we need to turn it faster. I don't know if you heard the news today about estimates that there's a pretty reasonable chance, is it 40% chance that one of these next 5 years is going to be at 1.5 degrees warmer? That's already the bottom of the target that we're trying to avoid.
Frankly, we could do with that at the moment, couldn't we?
Yeah. But that's where we are.
Weather versus climate, Stephen, come on.
Subtle difference like that.
Barry, good evening.
I just want to, you know, I can't argue with any of the facts that have come out of there, but I think Stephen's just touched on it there about SMEs. You know, there's a huge difference between Toyota, Nissan, and the average SME.
Yeah.
And I'd say the average SME, you know, I'd like to consider Playdale's quite a forward-thinking SME, you know, and this sustainability push is you're getting more people stuck in the headlights than I think are moving forward. And I'll just go a loop to, you know, we say that, you know, sustainable businesses are this, that, and the other, and the statistics. Well, the same statistics go for an export business. The same statistics probably can give them from, and what they all are, like you alluded to, are great, well-run companies. So what's the order of events that we want to happen? And I think we've gone to the next, you know, we've been a bit of a magpie and we've moved to the next shiny object. You know, we have, and we've recognized years ago that our productivity in the UK is piss poor, right? And if we are going to compete on the world stage and have a future and not be closed down by the rest of the world, then we've got to improve some of the basics and get the basic building blocks right, because we're not up to speed on the basic building blocks. And what we're doing to SMEs is going, get the basic building blocks right. Oh no, now you need to be sustainable, and now you need to digitize, and now you need to do this. And you've got people going, you know, it's like putting a pup in between its new owners, you know, and you're both running off in different directions. I saw it on the web the other day, and, you know, which way does the pup run? You know, and it's like, we've got to be really careful. And I think where government can come in is give us the staging posts to become a well-run industry. You know, part one is train your management. Part two is make your processes correct. Part three, digitize those processes, and some of the percentage of that digitization will give us sustainability. Part four, focus on sustainability. Part five, you know, it triple bottom line, it's your people. Part, you know, at this moment in time, we just keep throwing things.
Sounds like you've got it sorted, Barry.
Well, I believe I have, but unfortunately, people with more voice keep startling people and going the other way. But you've just got to be careful.
Yeah.
You know, there's got to be a sequence to these events. Otherwise, we're going to chase our tails, and in about 10 years' time, I'm going to make a real big prediction that we're still 39th in the world at being most productive. We're, you know, we're X amount of this, we're X amount of that. We're going to be a master of nothing and less competitive. And we're going, can't believe they're manufacturing that in such a country now. You've got to get the base right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody disagreed that you've got to get the base right. I think that's right. Just as an aside on, you know, the area certainly of my expertise around sustainability, is I have seen plenty of examples where sustainability becomes a lens through which owners and managers of a business can look at themselves, which then drives actually many of these, drives innovation, drives productivity and other things. I'll give you a really simple example. Well, it's really interesting. I love this example. It's from a few years back, but it still holds. There was a small tomato producer that used to produce for Tesco called APS Salads. And the owner and manager of APS Salads got the sustainability bug and was looking at waste. He was looking at his waste, and tomatoes throw off a lot of thick green stems, which are really difficult to deal with. And it was costing a lot of money, and wanted to do something about it. So he sort of designed a double-stomached digester. And they took all the waste product and they digested it, and they produced gas, and they used the gas, they burnt the gas to generate electricity. And they took the residue and they used the residue as fertilizer, and they captured the CO2 and they pumped it into the greenhouses. They got some extraordinary multiple on the growth on their tomatoes from the extra CO2 in the greenhouses and from lower costs on the fertilizer. They had no electricity from the grid. They produced it all on site. Their productivity went through the roof, their costs went through the floor, and then they slapped on the side of their vans for a while. They're delivering to Tesco, powered by tomatoes. They took the excess liquid gas and used it to fuel their vehicles. Now, it's a really nice example, but sustainability can be a lens through which you can look at your business to drive some of these other areas. That's not to say I totally agree with you, Barry. There are a whole series of basic steps that need to be put in place to get British manufacturing where we would like it to be. Correct.
That actually does that echoes the caution that I'm sure Stephen Barr, as somebody who's intimately involved with this, would say, which is you can't just take digital technologies and slap them onto an inefficient process, because all you're going to get is digital inefficiency. You've got to get things right. But as Barry says, so in a sense, I take your point on board very much, Barry. And one thing has been sort of nagging me when it comes to the issue of particularly smaller companies, and particularly the ones who are sort of rabbits in the headlights, is that in situations like this, change can appear to be happening quite slowly, and then it can happen all at once. And I think, and I wonder, Martin, and anybody, I throw it open, I wonder if there is a risk that actually some people will find themselves out in the cold because they just haven't acted or have been too unnerved, if that's the correct word, to act. Martin, do you think that that is a risk that particularly SME manufacturers should be looking out for?
I think there is definitely a risk about being left out in the cold. I'm seeing a number of large supply chain owners beginning to mandate action around carbon in particular, but also around other areas. And they are beginning to take steps towards deselecting suppliers that don't, participate in the programs. So I'm definitely beginning to see that. Obviously, if you're struggling to address sustainability issues, you're quite probably, as Barry was saying earlier, you're probably struggling in other areas as well. But this is not just a threat or a danger to the SMEs; it's a danger to the large business customer. So, I mean, let's just take Tesco as an example. So, Tesco are going to be launching a financing program for their SMEs, to help their SMEs to have low-cost access to capital, or access to low-cost capital, to drive greater efficiencies through sustainability projects. And this is being tied into, I don't know if you saw, but they have taken out a green bond to provide them with the working capital that they as a business have, something like £1.5 billion a year, and it's tied to the sustainability performance of their business. And the reason for all of this is, I mean, it makes nice headlines, but the reason for all of this is they are genuinely concerned about their security of supply, and that part of their supply which comes from SMEs. And they recognize there are both mitigation and adaptation challenges for these SMEs. And one of the barriers to them being able to adapt and mitigate, and so therefore be able to provide supply into the future, is access to capital. I mean, there are other things as well, but that is definitely one of them.
That raises so many issues around, as you said, supply chains. But there's another issue around carbon credits, and I am very ignorant about carbon credits and how they work. But I'm just wondering about carbon credits as an argument in favor of bringing some manufacturing back to the UK, so that we're not exporting our carbon cost by offshoring our manufacturing production. Is that a trend? Are you seeing that argument being used, Martin, when it comes to bringing manufacturing back from offshore?
Excuse me. I've seen some arguments about re-onshoring, but interestingly, less to do with exporting your emissions and carbon credits, and more to do with security of supply. And in the UK, to some extent, in reaction to obviously Brexit, but also in other places like North America as well, similar sort of arguments. So I see, at the moment at least, security of supply being a more important driver of re-onshoring than carbon credits. Though, of course, there is an opportunity. If you have your supply chain closer to you, there is an opportunity, and greater visibility of it and all the rest of it, there is an opportunity to address those issues as well.
The first person who raised that with me was a specialist design and engineering company working in the sort of supercar sector, and they said they were getting inquiries because it was, even though they charged a premium price over competitors offshore, the fact is that the customer they were selling to could offset that that premium
Right.
difference, that price difference, by
Well,
claiming back carbon credits.
yeah, no, I understand the mechanism. I mean, it's great. I just haven't seen a lot of that, but that's great to hear.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has run up against that as an argument. And Stephen, perhaps if we can go back to the previous point I was making about the you can't slap digital onto an inefficient company and make it efficient overnight. Would you? I think I'm right in saying that, but would you agree the same goes for sustainability?
Oh, totally. And I don't think any of us believes that digital is the whole answer to sustainability. I mean, far from it. It's a cultural thing as much as anything, as Ram and others have been pointing out. I think there is just this huge challenge of how to convince enough people, to change fundamentally their habits, whether we're talking about buyers or designers or manufacturers. Everybody has to play a part. And I think at the moment, we're all underestimating how tough that is. I think, Martin, I mean, you're much closer to action in supply chains, for example, but it sounds like that might be a better strategy to get bigger companies trying to influence bigger markets, and also at the same time their supply chains. That might well be a better strategy than the ones I'm involved in at the moment.
Can I just make a point about something that's going on in that area in the US? I don't know how much it got covered in the UK, but the most popular selling vehicle in the United States for the last 42 years has been the Ford pickup truck. They sell so many of them that the Ford pickup truck is on its own bigger than Disney, bigger than Nike. And they've announced that the 2022 edition is all electric. It's got the equivalent of a 600 horsepower engine. It's capable of towing God knows what. It's a pickup truck. It'll do 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds or something. But importantly, what they've done, and Ford have fundamentally shifted their marketing approach, because what they're encouraging particularly small companies to do is to use the fact that their people will be driving around in a battery. And so therefore, forget using any non-electric tools, because you can charge all of your tools. So you can leave the depot in the morning with everything fully charged, including the vehicle, of course, then drive it back at the end of the day. And there are a lot of organizations, a lot of companies that exist in large quantities in the US that are less common in Europe, like for example, landscaping companies. People spend a lot of money having people come and look after their huge gardens. A lot of these people still use two-stroke leaf blowers and strimmers and things. And what Ford are doing is they're setting up an entire marketing organization around the fact that this truck is no longer just a truck. The battery, a fully charged F-150 battery, has enough charge to run a house for days. And so they're selling this as an added benefit to people who live in remote areas where power goes out quite frequently as a result of ice storms or thunderstorms or whatever. And so this is an example of a big organization that's made a fundamental shift in their biggest single product, but not just leaving it there. They're putting in marketing and commercialization and communication support to encourage their customers to take full advantage of the benefits of this new product, as opposed to just simply trying to sell it, which I found a very, very interesting shift.
Yeah. And this is, we spoke earlier, didn't we? Ram initiated conversation about new business models. It's not just the technologies that are changing that will enable the transition that we require, but we have to support those with innovative ways of thinking about meeting our customers' needs, maybe very often expanding the problem that we're solving. The problem isn't just getting you to your job. The problem is getting you to job with a full suite of tools that won't run out. And it's that kind of, I mean, I've seen the same articles on it. It's extraordinary. And it's also one of those iconic brands that could just bust open a culture change in somewhere like the US. I mean, it's really, I was enormously impressed.
And also to Ram's point, the the price is very comparable to the current product. It's a couple of $1,000s more expensive, but it's a high-end truck for basically $35,000, which is what, 20 whatever it is, £1,000.
Yeah.
And it exactly to Ram's point, it's making doing the right thing the easy thing, because what it's already encouraging a number of small companies to say, right, how can we get solar into our buildings so that we can then charge these vehicles with the electricity that we're generating ourselves to further reduce, to get into the self-licking ice cream cone approach of the benefits of stringing multiple decisions together in ways that make everything A, more profitable, but B, also, of course, substantially more beneficial for the environment.
I do have a feeling, I don't know if this is right, but I do have a feeling that with the change of administration in the US and the amount of stimulus going in from the government into green infrastructure and the like, that there is about to be the most almighty unleashing of innovation around sustainability in the US. Certainly, the car companies we work with, and there are 3 now, only 2 I can publicly mention are in the US, in North America, and they are all hurling money and investment in a really smart way, not a stupid way, in a really smart way, into trying to understand how they're going to accelerate and lead this transition. I mean, they're traditionally behind the Japanese and European car manufacturers, but I think there's a real chance there'll be some leapfrogging. And I think, Ford Truck is just the beginning of something quite extraordinary, I hope.
Barry.
When you mentioned money then in the US administration, I meant to say earlier that obviously the things that are on point at the moment will probably keep the funding that they have, but I spoke to several people only in the last week that are very close to government, and they're saying do not expect any new spend after September this year. So we've had our lot, and we're going to return back to trait, which was what you were saying earlier about a conservative government being a conservative government, and they're saying the tide will turn around about September. So it's now or never. That I imagine things. Well, we're spending more money on COP26, aren't we, in the G7 than we spent on the Olympics? But I think that funding is going to be pretty much ring fenced. But anything after that, it's probably going to be down to us to make happen.
Yeah, and I'm also nervous about the midterms in the US. I mean, it could only be another less than 2 years. If the House goes Republican, then Biden's going to have to do an awful lot now, very quickly. And maybe it is down to corporations like Ford who are going to shift the culture in such a way that it could actually, in a sense, political obstructionism or backsliding won't have any effect. Beverly, good evening to you.
Hello, good evening, everybody, and very, very good to be able to listen in. And thank you, Martin, for all your thoughts and comments and insights. Really, really interesting. I'm very conscious of some work that's been done recently on carbon budgeting. I don't know whether you've been following, I'm sure you've probably been following this, Martin, but it suggests a sort of fair budget for the UK. Professor Tim Jackson from Surrey University has suggested a fair carbon budget for the UK would be 2.5 gigatons, which at around current rates is about 5 years left. I do think that current research suggests that we have immediate challenges, and I really would like to see a much greater emphasis on on this agenda being pushed now, as opposed to perhaps in 10 years when we've sort of worked out a few of the solutions. I'm very conscious too about how we seem to be pushing things that are sort of convenient for us, i.e. zero tailpipe emissions, forgetting about all the downstream emissions in building a battery vehicle, battery powered vehicle. We've had a bit of depleting resources and the fact that China owns most of it anyway. And I just wondered, I was very interested in your focus, I think, on biomethane and the tomato AD case study. And I don't know which company that is, and I'd love to know more about that. But I just wonder, what I come across with businesses is they always will say to me, oh, we can't do that now. We're waiting for hydrogen, or we're waiting for the batteries to be, effective to our HGVs, and we're probably just going to have to wait 10 years with our current red diesel, which I see being mentioned in the chat. And yet, but this is the 10 years when we need the action. So how do we prompt good action now? Let's say biomethane HGVs, which is a secure, locally produced supply chain, rather than electric or hydrogen, which requires massive amounts of electricity to produce.
Right, well, big question. I mean, you're absolutely right. Fear of technology redundancy, isn't it? It's a kind of fear of, if I do this now, it's the cost of the technology, because it's in the early stages, is high, and then I feel it's going to be overtaken by something else. I mean, it is a tricky conundrum. And coming back, I mean, Stephen touched on this a little bit, or at least touched upon what I was saying. I mean, this is why I think supply chains are so important, because you get the ability to coordinate and generate economies of scale, which can support action which otherwise wouldn't happen. This is why I think what Tesco is trying to do with its SMEs and providing, inverted commas, green finance, or finance for green initiatives, is so important. If you look at the deployments of technologies and the cost of deployment of new technologies, and how they come down rapidly if you get scale to it, we need to find ways of getting scale into the introduction of new technologies. And I think supply chains are a really, really important way of doing this. And I think, my business is only just starting to gather the data. So we collect, let's take a food and drink supply chain in the UK. We'll have 800 sites around the UK. We collect detail, and I mean really detailed picture, both of the footprint of those sites, but of the action plans, the things they are intending or would like to do in order to reduce their carbon footprint. That means we know exactly how many of them want to change out their old boilers to new ones, exactly how many of them are wanting to change the fleet over from carbon to non-carbon, etc. And I think that kind of insight should enable us to leverage the economies of scale to drive down the costs and therefore make it easier. But you're absolutely right. We can't wait for the silver bullet to be arriving, or the one that's going to succeed. We have to get going. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I note that Michael's placed something in the chat box, which is quite pertinent to this. It's an article in Forbes about how technology, it's not just business models, but technology itself is rapidly advancing. And it's a Brisbane-based company which came out of the local University of Queensland, developing batteries that charge 60 times faster than lithium. They're based on aluminium. And that, of course, demonstrates that nothing stationary in this argument. Things are moving all the time. And as I think we've demonstrated with our conversation tonight, what we're seeing is one development creates another, if not 2 or 3 developments, and it's an ever-changing landscape. I fully take on board Beverly's point. The talk of tearing up the landscapes of Cornwall and Wales and Northern England to dig lithium out. We've actually got quite a bit of this stuff. We've actually got the rare earths as well, but it's going to be very messy digging them up. But interesting also when it comes to rare earths, which are one of their use cases is in permanent magnets for electric motors. UK company in Newcastle has has managed to refine a technology that's been around for 120 years called sustainable electric motors, somebody will correct me, which haven't been able to work efficiently up to now, but they now can do it, and they don't require permanent magnets. And so technology, you know, the optimists will always say that technology will resolve whatever problem is coming down the pike at us. The biggest worry is, of course, and you alluded to this right at the start, Martin, is the black swans out there, or the grey swans. You don't know what you don't know. And what happens if it collapses? And I guess we're trying to keep optimistic. I mean, I think the sustainability argument for me personally is a very optimistic subject. I think of a world my grandkids are going to inherit, which is infinitely better run than the one that we created post-war, or that our parents and we created post-war. But I fear the unintended, either the unintended consequence or the unforeseen circumstance that will knock it all sideways. I don't know if anybody else has got any thoughts on that. We've got 5 minutes to go. So please, I mean, does anybody share my sort of tempered optimism around this? Yeah, Stephen.
Well, the sort of question that I see arising is that I think we'll probably do, in many ways, we'll probably do a pretty reasonable job of starting to get a grip on climate change and stuff. But the problem is, if we all try, as I see it, is that could all 7 billion of us, will we then have technology that allows all 7 billion of us to have a nice, comfortable life? Maybe if you were earning a total household income, say in the UK of say 40k, so you're not exactly, you know, turning left onto the 747 all the time, but you've got enough money to pay your mortgage, have a holiday. So if we all go as green as we can be in 30, 40, 50 years, would that still give us green enough to keep 7 billion people in a comfortable lifestyle? If not, then I think we are missing the bigger change, which intuitively I think is that in parallel with this generally not using the planet as a rubbish tip, we have got to find effective ways of bringing the population down, so that and one of the only ways I see that is almost proactively aiding what is called the third world in its narrowing of the social range, or within those countries. So in other words, unless we proactively help countries like Africa to build their economies, we all our green efforts will still end up with a planet that is a rubbish tip. So I think there are still some big gaps in what people are trying to achieve, and we need to start now, because the learnings and the timescales will be a long time. You can't do these things overnight. That's my bit anyway.
Yeah, no, controversial.
Well, but I think the COVAX initiative, which was designed to help the developing world get COVID vaccination, has demonstrated that actually we're not very good at this sort of thing, and I think that is a warning sign. So I'm Steve. My optimism is not quite as tempered as yours, but I do think that you make an excellent point. Folks, this has been a great discussion. Martin, I can't thank you enough. Every time we meet, you know, the conversation is stimulating and informative. I don't know if you've got any last thoughts about the conversation or whatever, but I do think it's been a fantastic discussion. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, Nick, and everybody else, and Stephen, good to see you, and Beverly, thank you, and everybody else. Great conversation. Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm going to head straight downstairs. this week, yet again, it's a Malbec. I can't work out why it's always a Malbec. I am going to have to sort out my buying decisions.
Or you can
Become a
ship
little
on
less
my way, Nick.
concerned.
Yeah.
You've got
Right.
too
A
much-
little less
you can ship on my
conservative.
way. So
Sorry, Ram, I didn't hear you. Sorry, mate.
if you've got too many bottles of Malbec, send some my way. I'll take them happily.
Oh dear.
You
Heart
bet
of
you will.
gold, Ram. Heart of gold.
I cannot wait
barracks in the
till
back garden.
we can all share one in person.
Oh,
All right.
Lovely.
Take
Lovely.
care.